I had served on the Galactic Governing Council for 40 years, and in all that time, I had never once felt the blood drain from both my hearts at the same time. Not until the moment Ambassador Drelix of the Torvon Dominion stood up in the middle of a routine trade session and told us his government had declared war on Earth. The chamber went quiet. Not the polite silence that follows a controversial proposal. This was something else. This was the silence of 200 delegates from 90 species trying to figure out if they had heard correctly. I looked at Drelix. He was standing at the speaker's platform with his chest puffed out, his forearms folded behind his back, in the traditional Torvon posture of authority. He was not smiling, but there was a satisfaction in his eyes that made my stomach turn. He believed this was a moment of strength. He believed he was announcing a great victory before it had even happened. The Torvon Dominion has formally initiated military operations against the human homeworld designated Earth. He said again, slower this time, as if the silence meant we had not understood. Our expeditionary fleet of 400 warships departed 6 hours ago. We are informing the Council as required under Section 14 of the Galactic Sovereignty Accord. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard that my claws left marks in the wood. 400 warships, 6 hours ago. This was not a proposal. This was not a debate. This was already happening. Councillor Yemni, 3 rows to my left, caught my eye. She was a Draven, one of the few genuine warrior species on the Council, and she had the look of someone watching a child walk toward a cliff edge. She shook her head, just barely. She knew. The same way I knew. But the rest of the chamber did not know. I could see it in their faces. Confusion, mostly. A few delegates from the outer systems looked bored. The junior representative from the Pelari Collective actually laughed, a short, nervous sound that echoed in the silence. "Forgive me, Ambassador," said Councillor Drennis of the Valerie, leaning forward with an expression of genuine puzzlement. "Did you say Earth? The human world?" "I did. The species that joined the galactic community barely 30 years ago. The same." Drennis sat back and looked around the chamber, as if waiting for someone to explain the joke. "They have, what? A handful of patrol ships? Some mining operations in their asteroid belt? Why would the Dominion waste 400 warships on a target that could be subdued with 40? Drelix allowed himself a thin smile. Earth occupies a position at the junction of 3 major hyperspace corridors. Whoever controls Earth controls the flow of trade and military movement across half the galaxy. The humans are a Class 4 civilization. They are barely spacefaring. They have no interstellar fleet, no planetary shield network, and no allies with mutual defense obligations. This is not a war, Counselor. This is a strategic acquisition. The murmuring started then. Not alarm, not outrage, just the low buzz of delegates calculating the political implications. Who benefits? Who loses trade routes? Who might be next? That was the Council for you. 200 representatives, and most of them were already thinking about what this meant for their own positions, rather than what it meant for the 8 billion people about to have 400 warships appear in their sky. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced them straight. "I invoke Emergency Advisory Protocol 7, I said, loud enough to cut through the murmur. "I request the right to present classified intelligence to this body before the Council formally acknowledges the Torvon Declaration." Every head turned toward me. Protocol 7 had not been invoked in 19 years. It was a rarely used provision that allowed a senior counselor to delay proceedings by presenting threat-level intelligence that the general body might not have access to. It was designed for exactly this kind of situation, when someone was about to do something catastrophic, and the Council needed to understand why. But the Speaker of the Chamber, a tall Fenori named Osal, shook his head. "Councillor Varric, Protocol 7 applies to proposed military actions that require Council authorization. The Torvon Dominion is not requesting authorization. They are exercising their sovereign right to engage a non-allied, non-protected species under Section 14. The Council has no authority to intervene." "Then grant me an advisory window," I said. 15 minutes, that is all I need. The schedule does not permit it. We have 14 more agenda items before recess. 14 agenda items will not matter if the Torvons start a war they cannot finish. That got a reaction. Drelix turned to face me directly. and his expression shifted from satisfaction to something colder. "Cannot finish?" he repeated. "Counselor Varric, I respect your experience, but you seem to be confused about the nature of this operation. We are deploying 400 frontline warships against a species that has never fought an interstellar engagement. Their entire military capability is limited to a few dozen light frigates designed for patrol work. This will be over in hours." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to grab him by his ridiculous ceremonial collar and shake him until he understood. But I had spent 40 years on this council, and I knew that shouting changed nothing. So I kept my voice steady. "Ambassador Drellix," I said, "I have read the classified contact file on Earth, the full version, not the summary that was distributed to general members. The original assessment compiled by our first contact team 30 years ago, with all subsequent intelligence updates attached. I am one of 11 beings in this galaxy who has clearance to read that document in its entirety." I paused to let that sink in. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Classified contact files were not unusual. Every species had one. But the fact that Earth's file was restricted to only 11 readers was, by itself, a statement. The standard clearance level for a Class 4 civilization's contact file was open access. There was no reason to restrict it unless there was something in it that the Council did not want widely known. "I cannot share the contents of that file in this chamber," I continued, "but I can tell you, on my oath as a counselor with 4 decades of service, that the Torvan Dominion is making a mistake that will be studied in military academies for the next 1,000 years." Silence again, but a different kind this time. Some of the delegates were looking at me with curiosity, others with skepticism. Drellix was looking at me with open contempt. "You are an old man, Varric," he said, "and old men see danger in every shadow. The humans are primitive, they are weak. They will surrender before our fleet even reaches orbit, and the Dominion will control the most valuable strategic position in the galaxy. That is not a mistake, that is vision." I stared at him for a long moment, then I sat down. There was nothing more I could do in this chamber. The rules were clear. The Torvan had the legal right to attack any unprotected species, and the Council had no mechanism to stop them. All I could do was watch. After the session, I caught Drellix in the corridor outside the chamber. He was walking with 2 of his military advisors, all 3 of them carrying themselves with the confidence of beings who believed they had already won. "Ambassador," I said, stepping into his path. "A private word." He waved his advisors ahead and faced me with an expression of barely concealed impatience. "Make it quick, Counselor. I have communications to manage." I stepped closer, close enough that no one else could hear. "I have read their file," I said. "The real one. Not the version your intelligence service gave you. The real one. You need to turn your fleet around." He studied my face for a moment, then smiled. "And what does the real file say that is so terrifying? That they have sharp teeth? That they can run for hours without stopping? I have read the biological assessments, Varric. They are impressive animals, but animals do not win wars against starships." "They are not animals," I said. "They are something the galaxy has not seen before. Something we do not have a category for. Every species thinks it is special. The humans are no different. The humans have been fighting wars against each other since before they invented writing," I said. "They have never stopped, not once in their entire history. They fight over land, over resources, over ideas, over pride. They have weapons that can crack the crust of their own planet, and they built those weapons while pointing them at each other. They are not a peaceful species that will crumble at the sight of your fleet. They are a species that has been practicing for this moment for 10,000 years." Drellix leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "They throw rocks at each other for sport, Varric. They chase balls across grass and call it glory. They are children playing at war. My fleet will show them what real war looks like." He walked away. I stood in the corridor and watched him go, and I felt something I had not felt in decades. Genuine dread. Not for Earth. Not for the humans, for the Torvan, for the 400 ships full of soldiers and crew members who had no idea what they were flying toward. I returned to my quarters that evening and sat in the dark for a long time. Counselor Yemni sent me a message, asking if I was all right. I told her I was fine. That was a lie. I opened my personal log and began recording an entry. I stated, clearly and for the record, that I had formally objected to the Torvan military action against Earth. I stated that I had attempted to invoke Protocol 7 and been denied. I stated that I had personally warned Ambassador Drelix and been dismissed. And then I added one final line that I knew would be read by historians long after I was gone. The Torvan Dominion has 400 warships, advanced weapons, and 30,000 years of military tradition. The humans have something else. I do not know what to call it, but I know this much. When the Torvan fleet arrives at Earth, they will find out what it is, and the rest of the galaxy will hear about it for a very, very long time. I closed the log and stared at the wall. In 34 hours, the fleet would arrive. In 34 hours, the galaxy was going to change, and there was nothing I could do but sit here and wait for the screaming to start. I could not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw 400 warships dropping out of hyperspace above a small blue planet, and I saw what was going to happen next, and it made my chest tight. So instead of sleeping, I did the only thing that felt useful. I opened the file. Earth's classified contact file was stored on a restricted server that required 3 separate authentication keys to access. My biometric signature, a rotating cipher that changed every 6 hours, and a physical token that I kept locked in a case, bolted to the floor of my quarters. I had read this file perhaps 20 times over the past 3 decades, and every time I read it, I understood it a little more, and every time I understood it a little more, I became a little more afraid. The file was not long. That was the first thing that surprised people when they finally got clearance to read it. You would expect the classified assessment of an entire species to be thousands of pages. Earth's file was 47 pages. 47 pages that describe the most dangerous civilization the galaxy had ever made contact with, written in the calm, precise language of intelligence analysts, who were clearly trying very hard not to sound alarmed. I scrolled to the first section, Initial Contact Assessment. I had memorized most of it by now, but I read it again anyway, because I needed to remind myself that what I remembered was real. The first contact team had arrived in Earth's system 30 years ago. Standard protocol. A small scientific vessel with a diplomatic escort, broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency. They had expected the usual reaction: panic, denial, religious crisis, political fragmentation. That was how most Class 4 civilizations responded to the discovery that they were not alone in the universe. The Polari had taken 11 years to form a unified response. The Valori had needed 30. The Draven, a warrior species with a reputation for courage, had spent 6 months in what their own historians later called the Silence, a period of collective shock so profound that their entire civilization essentially stopped functioning. The humans took 6 hours. 6 hours after first contact was confirmed, Earth's governments had established a unified military command, designated a single point of diplomatic contact, and begun coordinating a global defense strategy. Not because they were calm. The file made clear that there was enormous fear and confusion at every level of their society, but they had organized through it. They had looked at the unknown, felt the terror that every species feels, and then they had pushed that terror aside and started making plans. The intelligence analysts had flagged this as significant. I had flagged it as terrifying. The second thing the first contact team noticed was the speed at which humans adapted to new technology. The team had left a standard observation probe in orbit around Earth, a small automated device designed to monitor atmospheric conditions and communication patterns. It was supposed to be undetectable. The humans found it within 2 weeks. They did not destroy it. They captured it, brought it to a facility on their surface, and reverse-engineered its propulsion system within 2 years. 2 years. The Torvan had taken 80 years to reverse-engineer similar technology after their own first contact. The Polari had never managed it at all and had simply purchased the designs from a more advanced species. But it was the third section of the file that I always returned to, the section that the analysts had titled Military and Conflict History, and that I had privately titled The Reason Nobody Should Ever Attack This Planet. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. This was not unusual. Many species had conflict in their past. What was unusual was the scale, the frequency, and the creativity. Most species fought wars in cycles, a few generations of conflict, followed by a long period of peace, followed by another cycle. Humans did not follow this pattern. For humans, war was not a cycle, it was a constant. At any given moment in their history, somewhere on their planet, humans were fighting. They fought over territory, over ideology, over religion, over resources, over pride. They fought wars that lasted 100 years, and wars that lasted 6 days. They fought with swords and with nuclear weapons. They developed the ability to destroy their own planet, and then continued living on it, pointing those weapons at each other, daring each other to flinch. And they did not just fight, they innovated. Every war produced new technologies, new strategies, new doctrines. They learned from every defeat and improved after every victory. Their military evolution was not linear, it was exponential. In the span of just 1 century, they had gone from cavalry charges on animal back to weapons that could flatten entire cities in a single flash. The analysts had included a note at the end of this section. It was the only place in the entire file where the professional tone slipped, where the writers allowed a trace of personal reaction to seep through. The note read, "This species has spent its entire existence preparing for a war against an enemy it had not yet met. It is the assessment of this team that when that enemy finally arrives, the humans will be ready." I closed my eyes and let that sentence sit in my mind. They will be ready. There was more in the file. Physical assessments showing that humans were denser and stronger than 90% of known species, a consequence of evolving on a planet with gravity well above the galactic average. Endurance profiles showing that humans could sustain physical activity for hours, even days, at levels that would cause most species to collapse. Pain tolerance studies that made even the Draven analysts uncomfortable. You see, humans did not shut down when injured. They kept functioning. They had a word for it. Adrenaline, the file said. A chemical response that flooded their bodies during moments of danger and allowed them to operate beyond their normal limits. A species that had evolved to become more capable when threatened, not less. And then there was the doctrine section. Human military doctrine was unlike anything in the galactic database. Most species planned for victory. They designed strategies around winning, around achieving objectives, around the assumption that their forces would perform as expected. Humans did not do this. Humans planned for failure. Every unit, every ship, every individual soldier was trained in what they called worst-case protocols. What do you do when your communications are cut? What do you do when your commander is gone? What do you do when you are outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, and running out of ammunition? The answer, according to the file, was always the same. You keep fighting. You adapt. You find a way. I set the file down and sat in the dark. My quarters were silent, except for the low hum of the station's environmental systems. Somewhere out there, 400 Torvon warships were cutting through hyperspace, carrying soldiers who thought they were going to conquer a primitive world. Soldiers who had never fought anything like this. Soldiers who had been told that humans were a Class 4 civilization with no real military capability, and who had believed it because the alternative was too disturbing to consider. My console chimed. An incoming message from Counselor Yemni. I opened it. Varric, my intelligence network has tracked the Torvan fleet. Current speed and heading put them at Earth system in approximately 40 hours. I need your honest assessment. What happens when they arrive? I considered my response for a long time before I typed it. Yemni, the Torvan have never fought a species that wants to fight back. Every conflict in their history has been against civilizations that either surrendered quickly or fought conventionally and lost. The humans will do neither. The humans will do something the Torvan have never seen, and they will do it faster and harder than the Torvan believe is possible. Her reply came back in seconds. How bad? Bad enough that I recorded a formal objection for the archives. Bad enough that I warned Drelix personally and he laughed at me. Bad enough that I have not been able to sleep. There was a pause. Then, should I be worried about the wider implications? If the humans win, does the balance of power shift? I thought about that. I do not know, but I know that the galaxy is about to discover that the quiet little species on the edge of charted space is not what anyone thought it was. And that discovery is going to change everything. I closed the message. The silence of my quarters pressed in around me. 20 minutes later, another message arrived. This one was not from Yemeni. It came through the Council's diplomatic relay network, routed from the far edge of charted space, from a planet called Earth. My hands went cold as I opened it. The message was short. It was formatted in standard galactic diplomatic protocol, addressed to the full Council, and stamped with the official seal of something called the United Earth Defense Authority. It read as follows. To the Galactic Governing Council, we are aware of the Torvan fleet currently en route to our system. We have calculated its arrival time and fleet composition. We do not require assistance. We do not request mediation. We ask only that the Council ensure all non-combatant vessels are cleared from the hyperspace corridors within 2 light-years of our system. This is not a request for protection. This is a notification. Please keep the corridor clear. I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time. They were not asking for help. They were not begging for intervention. They were not pleading with the Council to stop the Torvan. They were telling the galaxy to step back and give them room. I thought about what that meant. I thought about a species that had just learned that 400 warships were coming to conquer their home, and whose first response was not panic, not desperation, but a polite request to clear the area. As if the Torvan fleet was not a crisis. As if it was an inconvenience. As if they had already decided how this was going to end, and they just needed everyone else out of the way so they could get on with it. I set the message down and looked out the viewport of my quarters at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the dark between those stars, the Torvan fleet was closing the distance to Earth, and 400 captains were reviewing their attack plans, and checking their weapons, and feeling confident about the days ahead. And somewhere on a blue planet that most of the galaxy had barely heard of, 8 billion humans were doing whatever humans do when a fight is coming. And the file, the real file, the one that only 11 beings had ever read, told me exactly what that was. They were getting ready. And they had been getting ready for a very long time. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 40 hours. In 40 hours, this would all begin. And when it was over, the galaxy would never look at that little blue planet the same way again. I knew this in my bones. I knew it the way I knew my own name, and I was absolutely, completely certain that the Torvan did not know it at all. The Council convened an emergency observation session the following day. Every delegate was present, every seat filled. Even the ones who normally sent aides or proxy voters had come personally. Word had spread through the diplomatic networks in the way that all alarming information spreads, quickly, and with increasing exaggeration at every step. By the time the session began, half the gallery believed the humans had already surrendered, and the other half believed the Torvan fleet had been destroyed by some kind of secret weapon. Neither was true. Not yet. The speaker had arranged for a long-range sensor relay to be projected on the main display wall. This was unusual. The council chamber was designed for debate, not for watching military operations in real time. But the speaker was no fool. He understood that every delegate in the room needed to see what was about to happen, because whatever happened next was going to reshape galactic politics for decades, and no one could afford to hear about it secondhand. I sat in my usual seat, 3rd row from the front, and watched the display calibrate. The image sharpened, and Earth's solar system came into view. A yellow star at the center, 8 planets in their orbits, asteroid fields, mining stations. And there, at the far edge of the system, just emerging from the hyperspace corridor, 400 Torvan warships in perfect formation. The chamber went quiet. Even the ones who had been dismissive fell silent at the sight of it. 400 warships was an enormous force. The Torvan Dominion had not deployed a fleet that size in over 2 centuries. Each ship was a capital-class vessel, bristling with weapons, carrying a full complement of ground troops and support craft. They moved in tight geometric patterns, their formation a statement of discipline and overwhelming force. I looked across the chamber at Ambassador Drelix. He was sitting in the Torvan delegation's booth, watching the display with the expression of a being who had already written the victory speech. His aides were taking notes, probably drafting the territorial claim documents. The fleet moved inward, past the outer gas giants, past the frozen worlds on the edge of the system, toward the inner planets, toward Earth. I noticed the silence first, not in the chamber, in the system. Earth's system was quiet. There were a few commercial stations in orbit around the fourth planet, but they appeared to be running on automated systems. A handful of asteroid mining rigs were scattered through the belt between the fourth and fifth planets, but they showed no signs of military activity. No defense fleet. No orbital weapons platforms. No minefield. Just the normal infrastructure of a young spacefaring civilization going about its business. "Where are their ships?" Counselor Drennis asked. He was leaning forward in his seat, squinting at the display. "They must have something. Patrol vessels, at least." "Their fleet registry shows 42 patrol frigates," one of the tactical analysts responded. She was a young Valori officer attached to the Council's observation corps, and she was reading from a data screen with the calm efficiency of someone who did not yet understand what she was looking at. Light vessels. Designed for anti-piracy and customs enforcement. No heavy weapons. No shield generators. Drennis sat back. "Then Drelix is right. This will not be a battle. It will be an occupation." I said nothing. I watched the display. I watched the mining rigs. The Torvan fleet reached the halfway point of the system. Their commander, a career officer named Holtrek, broadcast a surrender demand on all frequencies, standard Torvan protocol. Identify yourself, lay down your arms, submit to Dominion authority, or face destruction. No response. Holtrek waited the required 10 minutes. Then he broadcast the demand again. Silence. Nothing from Earth. Nothing from any human installation in the system. Just dead air and the background hiss of cosmic radiation. I saw Drelix shift in his seat, the first tiny crack in his confidence. A species that did not respond to a surrender demand was either too primitive to receive it or too prepared to bother answering it. And the humans were definitely receiving it. Their communication systems were fully functional. Every relay in the system was active. They were listening, they just were not talking. Holtrek ordered the fleet to continue its advance. The formation tightened. Weapons systems came online. Shields powered up. 400 warships moved deeper into the system, past the asteroid belt, into the space between the belt and the inner planets. That was when the first mining rig moved. I almost missed it. The rig was a standard design, a large industrial platform anchored to an asteroid, with heavy drilling arms extending into the rock face. It looked like every other mining rig in the galaxy, except that the drilling arms were retracting, folding back against the body of the platform, and as they folded, something underneath was revealed. Long, smooth barrels, built into the structure of the rig itself, hidden behind the drilling equipment like a blade concealed inside a walking stick. "What is that?" Counselor Drennis said. The rig fired. There was no warning, no targeting lock, no energy signature. The rig simply fired, and something massive and dark shot out of the barrel, at a speed that the sensors could barely track. It was not a missile. It was not an energy beam. It was a rock. A dense, metal-cored asteroid fragment, roughly the size of a Torvan shuttle, accelerating at a velocity that should not have been possible for a projectile without a guidance system. It hit the lead Torvan cruiser amidships. The ship did not explode. It crumpled. The mass of the projectile was so great, and the velocity so extreme, that the cruiser folded around it like paper. One moment it was a warship, the next moment it was debris. The chamber gasped. Not a polite intake of breath. A real, raw gasp that came from 200 throats at the same time. Then the other rigs fired. 17 mining rigs across the asteroid belt, all firing simultaneously. Each one launching the same kind of projectile, dense rock cores traveling at a fraction of light speed. No heat signature. No energy trace. No electronic guidance system to jam or confuse. Just mass and velocity, the two oldest weapons in the universe, deployed with a precision that suggested years of preparation. The Torvan fleet was designed to fight energy weapons. Their shields were calibrated to absorb and dissipate directed energy. They had point defense systems designed to intercept guided missiles. They had electronic countermeasures that could confuse the most sophisticated targeting computers in the galaxy. None of that mattered against a rock. 41 Torvan ships were destroyed in the first 90 seconds. 41 ships, gone, before the fleet even understood what was happening. The kinetic projectiles had no signature to detect, no frequency to jam, no guidance system to hack. They were invisible until the moment of impact, and by then, it was too late. The chamber erupted. Delegates were on their feet, shouting, pointing at the display. Drelix was standing, his face gray, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. His aides had stopped taking notes. Commander Holtrek regrouped quickly. I will give him that. He was a trained officer, and he did what trained officers do. He pulled his fleet together, identified the source of the fire, and directed a concentrated bombardment at the mining rigs. The rigs were stationary targets. They had no shields, no armor, no way to dodge. The Torvan obliterated them in minutes. But the damage was done. 41 ships lost, and the fleet had not even reached Earth yet. Holtrek reformed the remaining 359 ships into a tighter formation and pushed forward. Faster now, angry. The surrender demand was not repeated. This was no longer an occupation. This was a fight, and the Torvan were furious. They cleared the asteroid belt and entered the inner system. Earth was visible now on the long-range display, a small blue and white sphere hanging in the dark. Beautiful, in the way that all living worlds are beautiful. And quiet, still quiet. Then the frigates came. Not 42. The fleet registry had said 42 patrol frigates. Light vessels. No heavy weapons. What came out of the dark was not 42 ships. It was over 300. Small, fast, aggressive vessels that appeared from behind moons, from inside asteroid shadows, from orbits that had been calculated to keep them hidden until exactly this moment. They were not patrol ships. They were warships, compact and deadly, and they came from every direction at once. They did not fight the way the Torvan expected. They did not form a line and exchange fire. They fought in groups of 5 or 6, darting in close, striking at weak points, then pulling back before the Torvan guns could track them. When one ship took damage, it rotated to the rear of its group, and a fresh ship rotated forward to take its place. They moved like a living thing, like a single organism made of 300 parts, each part aware of every other part, each part trusting every other part to be exactly where it needed to be. The Council's tactical analyst was staring at her screen, with her mouth open. That formation, she whispered, that rotation pattern, it requires real-time coordination between every ship in the group. The communication delay alone should make it impossible. They are not using standard communication, Counselor Yemni said quietly. She was watching the display with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not fear, not admiration. Respect. The deep, quiet respect of a warrior watching something she recognized as superior. They have trained for this. Every pilot in that fleet knows exactly what the others will do. Because they have practiced it together 1,000 times. They do not need to communicate. They already know. The Torvan fought back hard. They were not cowards, and their ships were powerful. But they were fighting an enemy that would not stay still, would not form a line, would not behave the way an enemy was supposed to behave. Every time the Torvan locked onto a target, the target moved. Every time they concentrated fire on a group, the group scattered and reformed somewhere else. It was like trying to hold water in your fists. And then I heard the human communications. The Council's signal intercept team had been working to decode and translate the humans' combat chatter, and they patched it through to the chamber's audio system. I expected orders, battle commands, coordinates, status reports. The grim, terse language of soldiers under fire. What I heard was laughter. They were laughing. In the middle of a battle against 400 warships, the human pilots were laughing, joking. One pilot called a Torvan dreadnought, the big ugly one on the left, and asked if anyone wanted to take a shot at it. Another pilot responded that she had already put 2 holes in it and was saving the third for after lunch. A group commander called in a status report and ended it with, "Having a wonderful time, wish you were here." The chamber was stunned, not by the tactics, not by the numbers, by the tone. These people were not fighting for survival. They were not desperate. They were not afraid. They were enjoying this. not with cruelty or bloodlust, but with the loose, easy confidence of beings who had trained for exactly this moment, and who were finally, after years of preparation, getting to do what they were built to do. Commander Holtrek made his last decision 2 hours into the engagement. His fleet had been reduced from 359 ships to just under 200. The human frigates were not letting up. They were everywhere, striking from angles that should not have been possible, coordinating with a precision that bordered on telepathic. Holtrek did the only thing he could think of. He ordered a direct assault on Earth itself, break through the screen of frigates, get to the planet, and use orbital bombardment to force a surrender. It was a desperation move, the kind of strategy that only works when you have nothing left to lose. His remaining ships surged forward in a wedge formation, absorbing losses as they pushed through the frigate screen. Some of them made it. Perhaps 80 ships broke through and entered Earth's orbital space. They found the last surprise. Earth's orbital defense grid activated. It had been hidden inside the civilian satellite network, disguised as communication relays and weather monitoring stations. Thousands of satellites repositioned simultaneously, revealing weapon systems that had been dormant and invisible for years. The grid created overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach angle, every orbital trajectory, every possible attack vector. The 80 Torvan ships that had broken through the frigate screen flew straight into a wall of coordinated, precisely targeted weapons fire that left no gaps, no blind spots, and no room to maneuver. The battle lasted 11 hours from first shot to last. I watched every minute of it. The entire council watched every minute of it. When it was over, the Torvan fleet that had entered the system with 400 warships retreated with 31. 31 battered, limping vessels, trailing atmosphere and debris, running for the hyperspace corridor as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. The humans had lost 9 frigates. 9. Out of more than 300. 9 ships lost, against 400 of the Torvan Dominion's finest warships. The chamber was silent, the kind of silence that follows something so overwhelming that the mind refuses to process it immediately. Delegates sat in their seats and stared at the display, and tried to understand what they had just watched. I looked at Drelix. He was sitting very still. His hands were shaking. His aides had left the booth. He was alone, staring at the display where the wreckage of his fleet was slowly spreading across Earth's system, and his face had the blank, hollowed look of a being who had just watched everything he believed proven wrong in the most catastrophic way possible. On the display, a single broadcast was playing on loop, a message from Earth's military command, transmitted on all frequencies, aimed at the retreating Torvan ships. It was short. It was spoken in a calm, measured voice by someone who sounded neither angry nor triumphant. It said, "You are leaving our space. Do not return. There will not be a second warning." I listened to that message, and I thought about what it meant. It was not the message of a species that had been frightened. It was not the message of a species that had barely survived. It was the message of a species that had held back. A species that had more, much more, and had chosen not to use it. I looked around the chamber at 200 delegates who were just beginning to understand what I had known for 30 years. Earth was not a Class 4 civilization. Earth was not a primitive world of simple creatures playing at technology. Earth was something else entirely. And the galaxy had just found out. I was wrong about one thing. I thought it was over. The Torvan attacked, the Torvan lost, and now the galaxy would move on to the next crisis. I had seen enough wars in my 40 years on the council to know the pattern. One side wins, the other side licks its wounds, diplomats write treaties, and everyone pretends it never happened. The humans did not follow the pattern. 48 hours after the battle, the long-range corridor sensors detected movement outbound from Earth's system. Not inbound, outbound. Ships were leaving Earth, moving fast, heading toward Torvan border space. I was in my quarters when the alert came through. I read it twice, then 3 times, and then I closed my eyes and sat very still while the implications settled over me like cold water. They were following. The humans were not staying home to celebrate or rebuild or count their losses. They were going after the Torvan. The emergency session convened within the hour. The chamber was louder than I had ever heard it. Delegates were shouting over each other, demanding information, demanding action. Ambassador Drelix was on his feet, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked afraid. Truly, deeply afraid. The Council must invoke the mutual defense provisions of the Sovereignty Accord, he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. The humans are conducting an offensive military operation against Torvan's sovereign territory. This is an act of aggression. The Council is obligated to respond. The response was not what he expected. You attacked them, Councillor Yemni said from her seat. Her voice was flat, her expression unreadable. You took 400 warships to their homeworld and tried to conquer them. They defended themselves. And now you want us to protect you from the consequences? The mutual defense provisions are clear, Drelix insisted. Any member state that faces military aggression is entitled to Council protection, regardless of the circumstances. The circumstances are that you started this war, Councillor Drennis said. You stood in this chamber and announced it. You told us it would be over in hours. You laughed at Councillor Varric when he tried to warn you. And now you want the rest of us to stand between you and the species you chose to provoke? The debate raged for 3 hours. I did not participate. I sat in my seat and watched the long-range sensor data on my personal screen. The human fleet was not large. 60 ships, maybe 70. A fraction of what they had deployed during the defense of Earth. But they were moving with purpose, and their heading was unmistakable. They were going to the Torvan border. The Council eventually voted. The motion to invoke mutual defense failed. Overwhelmingly, only the Torvan themselves and 2 of their minor allies voted in favor. Everyone else abstained or voted against. The message was clear. The Torvan had made their choice, and the Torvan would face the results alone. Drelix stormed out of the chamber. I watched him go and felt something complicated. Not sympathy exactly. He had brought this on himself and on his people. But there were families on the Torvan border worlds. Civilians who had nothing to do with the fleet or the decision to attack Earth. Children who did not know what their government had done and would not understand why ships were coming. I did not need to worry. The humans, it turned out, had thought about that too. The first reports from the border came in 12 hours later. The human fleet had arrived at the outer edge of Torvan military space and had begun systematic operations against every Torvan military installation in the corridor. Shipyards, weapons depots, sensor arrays, communication hubs, repair stations. They hit them one by one, precisely, thoroughly, and without a single deviation from a pattern that became clear very quickly. They were only hitting military targets. Only military targets. No civilian stations. No colony worlds. No trade ships. No population centers. The human ships would enter an area, identify every military installation, destroy it completely, and move on. The precision was extraordinary. In one case, a Torvan weapons depot was located less than 2 kilometers from a civilian habitat complex. The humans destroyed the depot and left the habitat untouched. Not a single civilian casualty. The intelligence reports landed on my desk in a steady stream, and I read each one with growing amazement. This was not the behavior of a species on a rampage. This was not revenge. This was surgery. The humans were systematically removing the Torvan's ability to launch another attack, and they were doing it without harming a single person who was not wearing a military uniform. Councillor Yemni came to my quarters that evening. She did not send a message first. She simply appeared at my door, which told me she was shaken, because Yemni was not the type to show up unannounced. I let her in. She sat in the chair across from my desk and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "I am not shaken because the humans won. I expected them to win, after what we saw. I am not shaken because they are pursuing the Torvan. That is a logical military response. I am shaken because of how they are doing it. The precision," I said. "Not just the precision. The restraint." She leaned forward. "Varric, I am a Draven. My species has fought 12 major wars in our history. We know combat. We know what happens when a species with overwhelming military superiority engages a weakened enemy. You press the advantage. You hit everything. You make the cost so high that no one ever dares to challenge you again. That is how wars are won. That is how every war in galactic history has been won. But the humans are not doing that. The humans are doing the opposite. They are showing the galaxy that they can reach into the heart of Torvan territory and take apart their military piece by piece. And they are also showing the galaxy that they can do it without hurting anyone who did not choose to fight. Do you understand what that means? I did understand. It means they are not trying to win a war. They are trying to send a message. And the message is not for the Torvan, Yemni said. The message is for everyone else, for every species on the council, for every civilization in the galaxy. The message is, we can do this. We can reach you anywhere, destroy anything, and stop exactly where we choose to stop. We have the power to burn your worlds, and we are choosing not to. Remember that. We sat in silence for a while. Outside the viewport, the stars were the same as they had always been, but they felt different now. The galaxy felt different. Something had shifted, and it was not going to shift back. The next morning, a new message arrived through the diplomatic relay network, from Earth. Addressed to the full council. I opened it with the same cold feeling in my hands that I had felt when I read their first message, the one that told us to keep the corridor clear. This time, the message was longer, but the tone was the same, calm, polite, firm. To the Galactic Governing Council, the United Earth Defense Authority requests a formal session of the full council at the earliest available date. We will be sending a diplomatic representative to address the body. The purpose of this session is to discuss a proposed amendment to the Galactic Sovereignty Accord regarding the legal framework governing unprovoked military aggression against sovereign homeworlds. Our representative will arrive within 72 hours. We look forward to a productive discussion. I read it 3 times. They were not coming to threaten. They were not coming to demand territory or reparations. They were coming to change the law. They had just demonstrated, in the most dramatic fashion possible, that they could defend themselves against any fleet in the galaxy. And now, they wanted to make sure that no one, not just them, ever had to do it again. I forwarded the message to Counselor Yemni. Her response came back in seconds. Well, that is not what I expected. It was not what anyone expected. A species that had just won the most one-sided military victory in galactic history was sending a diplomat, not a general. They were proposing a law, not issuing demands. They were thinking about the future of the galaxy, not about their own power. 72 hours. That was how long I had to prepare myself for what was coming. Because I knew, with the certainty of someone who had spent 30 years reading Earth's file, that whatever the humans proposed, the galaxy would never be the same afterward. I spent those 72 hours doing something I had not done in years. I went through the council archives, reading every treaty, every accord, every resolution that had been passed in the last 500 years of galactic governance. I was looking for precedent. A species that had won a war and then used its victory to strengthen the laws that protected everyone. I searched for 3 days. I found nothing. In 500 years of galactic history, no species had ever won a war and then asked for nothing but a better set of rules. The human ship arrived on the 3rd day, a small diplomatic corvette, unarmed, flying under a peace banner. It came through the main corridor and docked at the council station without incident. But I noticed, watching from the observation gallery, that every council patrol ship in the area had quietly repositioned itself to give the human vessel a wide berth. No one had ordered them to. They had done it on their own. Word had spread through every crew, every station, every ship in council space. Everyone knew what the humans had done, and no one wanted to be the one who accidentally gave them a reason to demonstrate it again. The human representative entered the council chamber at precisely the scheduled time. Not a minute early, not a minute late. I noticed that detail because it told me something about the kind of people we were dealing with. They respected the process. They followed the protocol. They had come to work within the system, not to overwhelm it. She was a woman of average height, with dark hair pulled back from her face and an expression that gave nothing away. She wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no insignia, no visible indication of rank or authority. She carried no weapons, she had no guards. She walked into a chamber filled with 200 delegates from 90 species, any one of whom might have harbored resentment toward her kind, and she did it alone. Every eye in the chamber followed her, as she crossed the floor to the speaker's platform. The silence was extraordinary. I had been in this chamber during declarations of war, during the fall of empires, during moments that had reshaped entire star systems. I had never heard it this quiet. She reached the platform and looked out at the assembly. Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on certain delegates, and I could tell she had been briefed. She knew who everyone was. She knew the politics, the alliances, the tensions. She had done her homework. "My name is Claire Whitford," she said. Her voice was clear and even, carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. "I am the diplomatic envoy of the United Earth Defense Authority, and I appreciate the Council's willingness to convene this session on short notice. I will try not to take more of your time than necessary." She was good, I could tell immediately. No bluster, no grandstanding, no attempt to intimidate or impress, just a calm, professional presence that conveyed competence and control. She spoke the way a surgeon speaks, with precision, with economy, and with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. "3 weeks ago," she continued, "the Torvan Dominion deployed 400 warships against Earth. They did so without provocation, without warning, and without any attempt at diplomatic resolution. Their stated goal was the military conquest and occupation of our homeworld. Under the current provisions of the Galactic Sovereignty Accord, this action was legal. Any member state may engage in military operations against a non-allied, non-protected species at its discretion, provided it informs the Council as required under Section 14. She paused. Let the silence do its work. We defended ourselves. The details of that defense are, I believe, well known to this body, so I will not review them. What I wish to discuss today is not what happened, but what should happen next. I leaned forward in my seat. Around me, I could feel the chamber doing the same. 200 delegates, all leaning slightly forward, all waiting to hear what humanity wanted. This was the moment. The moment when the species that had just shattered the most powerful fleet in the galaxy would reveal its demands. "Earth does not seek territory," Claire Whitford said. "We have no interest in expanding beyond our own system at this time. Our borders are where they were before the Torvan attack, and we intend to keep them there." A murmur rippled through the chamber. I caught Councillor Drennis exchanging a glance with the Polari delegate. Neither of them had expected that. "Earth does not seek reparations," she continued. "The material cost of our defense was significant, but it is a cost we are prepared to bear. We will not demand payment from the Torvan Dominion or any other party." The murmur grew louder. No reparations. A species that had just won one of the most decisive military victories in galactic history was not asking for compensation. That was unprecedented. Literally unprecedented. I had checked. "Earth does not seek to join the Council's mutual defense framework." That one caused an audible gasp. The mutual defense framework was the single most valuable provision in galactic law. It guaranteed that an attack on one member was treated as an attack on all. Every species in the galaxy wanted that protection. It was the primary reason most civilizations joined the Council in the first place, and the humans were declining it. "We appreciate the value of collective security," Claire Whitford said, addressing the confusion she could see on every face in the chamber. "But we believe that true security does not come from alliances. It comes from principles. And it is a principle that we wish to propose today." She touched a control on the speaker's podium, and the main display wall lit up with text. "A proposed amendment to the Galactic Sovereignty Accord." I read it quickly, then slowly, then a third time to make sure I understood what I was seeing. The amendment was simple, elegantly simple. It proposed that any unprovoked military attack on a sovereign species' homeworld be classified as a crime against the galactic community, not just the target species. It proposed that such attacks trigger an automatic response from the full Council, including economic sanctions, military exclusion zones, and the possibility of collective military action. It proposed that no species should ever have to face the threat of homeworld invasion alone, regardless of its military strength, its alliance status, or its position in the galactic hierarchy. "This is not about Earth," Claire Whitford said. "Earth has demonstrated that it can defend itself. This amendment will not change that. This is about the next species, the next civilization that is young and small, and does not yet have the ability to defend its home against a larger power. The next world that sits on a strategic corridor and becomes a target because of its location, rather than its actions. The next planet full of people who wake up one morning to find 400 warships in their sky, and no one willing to help. She looked directly at the Torvon delegation's booth. Ambassador Drelix was sitting there, alone. His aides had not returned since the vote on mutual defense. He looked diminished, as if the chair had grown larger around him. When Claire Whitford's gaze found him, he did not look away, but I could see the effort it cost him. "We hold no hatred toward the Torvon people," she said. "Their soldiers fought with courage, and their civilians have been treated with the respect they deserve. Our military operations against Torvon border installations have concluded. We have withdrawn our forces from Torvon space. The installations we dismantled were military assets that posed a direct threat to our security, and they have been neutralized. We have no further territorial or military objectives." She turned back to the full chamber. "What we do have is a proposal. A proposal that would make this galaxy a place where strength is not the only protection against aggression. Where the small are protected by the same principles that protect the powerful. Where no species, no matter how young or how weak, has to sit alone in the dark and wonder if someone is coming for their home." The chamber was completely still. I looked around at 200 delegates and saw something I had rarely seen in 40 years of galactic politics. I saw agreement. Not unanimous, not immediate, but the kind of slow, quiet consensus that forms when an idea is so clearly right that opposing it would require a willful refusal to see the obvious. The debate that followed was spirited, but surprisingly brief. The warrior species, led by Councillor Yemni and the Draven delegation, spoke first, and spoke in favor. They understood what Earth had done, not just in the battle, but in the restraint that followed, and they respected it. The trade-focused species voiced concerns about economic implications, but ultimately could not argue against the principle. The minor powers, the small civilizations that had always lived with the quiet fear of being too weak to defend themselves, voted in favor almost unanimously. Drelix attempted to object. He stood, and the chamber quieted, and for a moment I thought he might say something meaningful, something about sovereignty, about precedent, about the danger of allowing one species' victory to rewrite the rules for everyone. But he never got the chance to speak. Because Claire Whitford looked at him. She did not say anything. She did not make a gesture or a threat. She simply looked at him, calmly, steadily, with an expression that carried the weight of everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. Every ship destroyed, every installation dismantled, every moment of precision and restraint that could have been something far worse. It was not a look of anger. It was not a look of contempt. It was the look of someone who had already considered every possible objection and found none of them sufficient. Drelix sat down. The amendment passed. The vote was 173 in favor, 12 against, 15 abstentions. It was the most decisive vote in the Council's history. After the session, the chamber emptied slowly. Delegates lingered in small groups, talking quietly, processing what had just happened. I remained in my seat for a long time, watching the display wall where the text of the amendment was still projected. Simple words, clear principles. The kind of thing that should have been in the accord from the beginning, but never was, because no one had ever won the right to propose it. I found Claire Whitford in the corridor outside the chamber. She was standing by a viewport, looking out at the stars, alone. Her expression was the same as it had been on the platform, calm, controlled, giving nothing away. But there was something in her eyes that might have been weariness, or relief, I could not tell. "Ms. Whitford," I said, "do you have a moment?" She turned and studied me. "Councillor Varick, I was told you tried to stop this before it started, that you invoked an emergency protocol and warned Ambassador Drelix personally." "I did." He did not listen. "No, he did not." She was quiet for a moment. "You read our file, the classified one." It was not a question. "I did. I am one of 11 beings with access to the full version." "I know. We have a list." She said it without malice or accusation, just a statement of fact. The humans knew who had read their file. Of course they did. I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since the first mining rig had fired. You were ready. The asteroid launchers, the hidden frigate fleet, the orbital defense grid. It was all pre-positioned. You have been preparing for an attack like this for years. Maybe decades. How long? Since first contact, she said. 30 years. From the day your observation probe entered our system, we began planning for the possibility that someone would come with hostile intentions. We hoped it would never happen. We worked toward peace, toward trade, toward integration with the galactic community, but we also built contingencies, quietly, just in case. You hid an entire military infrastructure inside civilian systems. Your fleet registry showed 42 frigates. You had over 300. We did not lie on our registry. We had 42 frigates designated for patrol duty. The rest were classified under different categories: research vessels, survey ships, customs enforcement, all technically accurate, all built to convert to combat configuration in under 12 hours. I shook my head. 30 years of preparation, hidden in plain sight. Why did you never tell the Council what you were capable of? If the galaxy had known, the Torvan would never have attacked. She smiled. It was a small smile, the first genuine expression I had seen from her. Because, Counselor, a weapon you have to show off is not much of a weapon. We did not want to intimidate anyone. We did not want to be treated as a threat. We wanted to be part of the galactic community, to trade, to learn, to grow. But we also knew that the galaxy is not always kind, and that being small and quiet sometimes makes you a target. So we prepared, quietly, and we hoped we would never have to use any of it. But you did. But we did. And now the galaxy knows. And now there is an amendment that says no one else should ever have to go through what we went through. That is what we wanted, Counselor. Not power, not territory, not revenge, just a rule that says homeworlds are protected, that the small are not prey, that strength is not the only thing standing between a civilization and destruction. I looked at her for a long time. I thought about Drelix and his 400 warships, and his certainty that the humans would fold in hours. I thought about the mining rigs with their hidden weapons, and the frigates that came from everywhere, and the orbital grid that appeared from inside civilian satellites. I thought about the precision of the follow-up operations, every military target destroyed, every civilian untouched. And I thought about this woman, standing here in a simple dark suit, asking for nothing but a better law. And the Torvan installations you dismantled, I said. You could have gone further, much further. You could have taken their homeworld. Why did you stop? Her expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something deep and quiet and very human. Because we are not conquerors, Counselor. We are just people who protect what is ours. The Torvan fleet is broken. Their border installations are gone. Their civilians are safe, and their children are sleeping in their beds tonight. And they do not have to be afraid. That is enough. It has to be enough. Because if it is not, if we take everything just because we can, then what exactly are we protecting? What is the point of being strong if strength is all we are? She held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded politely, and walked away down the corridor toward the docking bay where her ship was waiting. I watched her go, a single human, unarmed, walking calmly through a space station filled with species that had spent 3 weeks learning to be afraid of her kind. And she walked like someone who had no interest in being feared, just in being understood. I returned to my quarters and opened my personal log. I sat for a long time before I began recording, because I wanted to get the words right. I wanted them to be accurate. I wanted whoever read this entry, years or decades or centuries from now, to understand exactly what I had witnessed. I have served on the Galactic Governing Council for 40 years, I said. I have watched empires rise, and I have watched them fall. I have seen wars fought over territory, over resources, over pride, over nothing at all. I have watched civilizations burn each other to ash and call it victory. I have never, not once in all those years, seen a species win a war and then ask for nothing but peace. I have never seen a civilization with the power to conquer, choose instead to protect. I have never seen strength used not as a weapon but as a shield, held out over those too small to shield themselves. I do not know what to make of humanity. They are young. They are strange. They are capable of a ferocity that frightens me, and a compassion that confuses me, sometimes in the same breath. They built weapons into their asteroid miners and warships into their patrol boats, and then they used all of it to defend their home, and when the fighting was over, they put their weapons away and sent a diplomat. I have spent my career studying the species of this galaxy, trying to understand what drives them, what shapes them, what makes them dangerous or safe. I have categories for every kind of civilization. I have models and frameworks, and decades of analysis. Humanity does not fit any of them. But I know this much. The galaxy is watching them now. Every species, every government, every fleet commander and diplomat, and intelligence analyst in charted space is watching the humans and trying to decide what they are. And for the first time in my career, for the first time since I took this seat and began the long, exhausting work of trying to keep a galaxy from tearing itself apart, I believe it might actually become a safer place. Not because the humans are powerful, although they are. Not because they have weapons that can humble any fleet in the galaxy, although they do. But because they have shown us something that none of us expected. They have shown us that power and mercy can exist in the same hands. That strength and kindness are not opposites. That a species can be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy and still choose to be gentle. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if the humans will always be what they are today. They are young, and the galaxy has a way of changing people. But today, right now, in this moment, they are something remarkable. And I am glad, for the first time in a very long time, that I lived to see it. I closed the log. I sat in the silence for a while. Then I opened Earth's classified contact file one last time, scrolled to the cover page, and added a personal annotation. 2 words, simple and clear, and intended for whoever read this file next, whether it was a counselor, an intelligence analyst, or a future ambassador who was thinking about doing something unwise. The annotation read, "Do not provoke." I saved the file, closed it, and leaned back in my chair. Outside the viewport, the stars burned in the dark, the same as they always had. But they looked different now. Warmer, somehow. As if the galaxy itself had taken a breath, held it for 3 long weeks, and was finally, quietly, letting it go.